Thank you very much. And I'd just like to thank everybody at the University of San Francisco for the invitation and for this incredible opportunity to participate in a really dynamic panel. Um, I just want to start off by noting that this is very much an in progress paper, so it's a little bit raw, and I'll be talking much more about Japan than the US, but I think especially folks in San Francisco will know quite a bit about the state of homelessness in the US, and can probably have some good ideas for questions about what's going on in Japan. I want to start off. Let's see. Here we go. Just introducing this or going over this point of homelessness being invisibilized in Japan. So this picture is from the early 2000s in Tokyo along the Sumida River, where there were upwards of around 1,000 people living alongside the river in these basically huts and tents. And if anybody had visited Japan in the audience around this time, it was really noticeable. Street homelessness was very noticeable in Japan. In almost any major park, in any city, there were large encampments like this. A lot of the people that were living unsheltered were men who had been working in the construction industry, kind of at the bottom rungs of the construction industry and day labor, and they were middle-aged and aging. And with the burst of the bubble economy in 1993, unemployment in construction really shot up, and these were the people that really lost their jobs and became homeless en masse. They had been living in pay-by-the-day hotels and things like that. And so, through the early 90s into the early 2000s, there was this big swelling of homelessness in Japan, and just about any city in Japan. But after first implementing a program that was kind of relied on transitional housing, where people were put in congregate shelters and told to find jobs within a short, limited amount of time, then save money and then go out and rent in the rental market. When that didn't really reduce street homelessness, the Tokyo metropolitan government looked towards the US and tried to and decided to implement a housing first program, where they basically master leased hundreds of apartments in Tokyo, and then had nonprofit organizations go out and do outreach and spend the time in building trust. And they made the offer to people that they could move into these apartments at no cost at the beginning. They wouldn't have to stay in a shelter, and they would pay 3,000 yen or $30 a month, and the city would provide jobs for 6 months. And a lot of people took up this offer and moved into housing. Those who didn't find work ended up on welfare, and I'll talk about that welfare program in a little while. So over the span of about 9 years, several hundred people moved into housing through this specific program. But subsequently, this is a picture from just a few years ago. But after that, the Tokyo metropolitan government made it, they pretty much forbid anybody to put up a new tent along the river. This is, during that time, the Sky Tree was built, and tourism had become much more important in Tokyo and other Japanese cities. So they didn't allow people to who are newly homeless to build huts and stay there. They moved the people who did not want to do the 3,000 yen apartment program under this one area, under this bridge in this photo, and it's a little bit north in the river from the previous photo, but it's completely hidden from above. You can't see it from the Sky Tree or anything like that. And there's, only 10 to 20 huts there now, but it was done in a very Japanese way. They had these squares on the ground. You had your square. There were no services provided. Everybody was self-sufficient and kind of living off of recycling and other jobs like that. But so now you don't really notice street homelessness in Japan very much. It's very hard to see. This figure here compares street homelessness over time in Japan and the US. And the top line is the United States, and the bottom line is Japan. So as you can see, in the early 2000s, or the 2000s through the 2000 teens, street homelessness in both countries was declining. But then from 2013 or so, it increased in the US again. And I'm sure all of you know that it's become even more visible in recent years. And a lot of that was because of the acceleration of the affordable housing crisis and the kind of the stoppage of programs that had been implemented in the wake of the global economic crisis to prevent homelessness. And so in the US we saw increasing homelessness again, but in Japan, not only did they start out with much less street homelessness, but they had a continued decline of street homelessness, down to almost 4,000 people on any given night in the entire country. So some colleagues and I have done some comparisons of the public assistance systems in the U.S. and Japan to highlight, what are the causes of this kind of dramatic decline in Japan. And a lot of U.S. scholars look at this and just say it's amazing, and how did they do this? And this is kind of our answer. I'm a little bit skeptical of just kind of saying this is a clear success in Japan, but I do think that the U.S. can learn from this. But I'd be a little bit more skeptical than some of my co-authors, I think. But in Japan, we really highlighted the difference to be based on this welfare program called Seikatsu Hogo, which is translatable to livelihood protection. And it is somewhat like a universal basic income program. So basically, the three components of the program that we find really strong and contributing to the success are: one, it's generality. So basically, you just have to have an income below a maximum, and that's the only thing that qualifies you for the benefit. So it's not like the U.S. where you have to prove and document that you have a disability and get all the paperwork lined up or have children and things like that. It's available to anybody that needs it. The next component is the program's comprehensiveness. So when you're awarded the benefit, you get a cash benefit to pay for your daily living expenses. You automatically get a housing benefit to cover the cost of your housing. You automatically get health insurance and employment search assistance and some other programs. So it's several programs all in one that you get through applying through one window, so to speak. Whereas in the US, you apply to SSI. Once you've spent all that time winning that battle, next you have to apply separately to housing. You have to find out how to get your health insurance and all of that. It takes years and years to get this package together. And then the last aspect of the program that we found to be really successful is the expeditiousness. And I think this is hard to believe for practitioners in the US, but in Japan, the law says that once they receive an application, the welfare office has to issue a verdict within 30 days, but the practice is actually shorter. It's 14 days. And I've never heard of an application taking longer than those 14 days. So I think those things together are really things that we can learn from in the US. But some of the problems with the program are If you don't have housing lined up, or if you don't come in with an advocate when you apply that can help you with the housing, then you're likely to be put in a congregate shelter. Also, the law requires that family members be contacted to see if they can help you before the state will. Not all welfare offices apply that, but that's enough of a fear, and there's a stigma around welfare to cause people, not to apply. And also, Japan uses a really narrow definition of homelessness. So, they've documented that decline in street homelessness, but if they applied a broader definition of homelessness in Japan, the results wouldn't look as great. And I'll talk a little bit about other ways that homelessness is hidden in Japan. So a lot of the older day laborers that had become homeless in the 90s and early 2000s, they're kind of like an older homeless population, but there's a bigger population of younger workers or somewhat older marginalized workers in Japan who might work part-time in service industries or delivery or construction and things like that, but not have enough money to rent an apartment. So they end up living in 24-hour establishments. This is a picture of what they call a manga kisa, or an all-night cafeteria for comic books, or they call them internet cafes. So they run 24 hours. You get your own cubicle. There's a place to brush your teeth and stuff like that. So a lot of precarious workers end up living in places like this. And there's a really excellent short documentary about this on Shiho Fukada's website. If you just Google Shiho Fukada, you can find that. I was going to try to show it, but I think we're short on time, so I'll skip that. But the Japanese government has collected data on this population, so it has been documented that it is quite sizable and even larger than the population that you see on the streets. So in 2007, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare did a national survey and found at least 5,400 people living in internet cafes that had no other place to stay. Some of these other interesting things that they found were most people were working, again, in part-time or dispatch jobs. They found kind of a bimodal population age-wise, a lot of young people as well as kind of middle-aged and older workers. They also found a lot of women, whereas on the streets, it's extremely rare to find women living on the streets in Japan, although they definitely are there. But among this hidden or internet cafe refugees, as the media calls them, they were a much larger population. 2017, the Tokyo metropolitan government found 4,000 people just in Tokyo in the similar situation, people living in the internet cafes with nowhere else to go. Additionally, more recently, some colleagues did an online survey where they asked 40,000 people if, using a much broader definition of homelessness, because this hadn't been looked at in Japan. So not just street homelessness, asking people if they had ever been in a situation where they had to stay with family and friends because they didn't have anywhere else to go. They'd been in an employer dorm, in one of these internet cafes, capsule hotels, 24-hour restaurants or shelters. And they found, a substantial percentage of people, 5.2% in their lives had been in that situation. 1.8% had been in the last 5 years. So this really showed that the problem of homelessness was much bigger than just that street population. Now I want to pivot a little bit and talk about kind of the community side of things and neighborhood responses to homelessness. So over the past few years, I've been engaged in this project. It got really stretched out by the pandemic, but I formed a network of researchers and practitioners who work in service hub neighborhoods. And basically a service hub, it's a concept in geography, urban geography, but Service Hub is a neighborhood where homelessness and housing resources to address homelessness and nonprofit organizations and social movement organizations cluster. So I'm sure folks in the audience from San Francisco could probably guess where in San Francisco this would be. I'm not, I am a Californian, but Southern Californian, but I know enough about San Francisco that it's probably the Tenderloin. But I had 4 neighborhoods in 4 different cities as part of this project. One was Skid Row, Los Angeles. The other one was a neighborhood called Overtown in Miami. And then the 2 neighborhoods in Japan were Sanya in Tokyo. It's a traditional or historic day labor ghetto, and where there's a lot of SRO hotels, and a similar neighborhood in Osaka called Kamagasaki. But we networked, we visited these places, and exchanged ideas and stuff like that. But we're really looking at these neighborhoods. They were all created out of policies of discrimination to contain marginalized populations in certain neighborhoods. But we're interested in how they actually formed communities out of that containment. Just one example of kind of the overlapping multiple social safety nets that we see in these neighborhoods, and we have a lot more examples, but this one kind of, I think, shows how care and resistance kind of are born out of these efforts. But it was at a free medical clinic that I've volunteered at for the last 25 years or so, and they also participated in this network. But they were a free medical clinic founded by lay Catholics, but they collaborated with a nearby Buddhist temple to create a community grave for men in the neighborhood who had been separated from their families and had no one to kind of tend to them after they died. And in Japanese Buddhism, it's very important to have someone to tend to your grave site, to make sure you don't become a floating soul in the afterlife. So this was really important for the men in the neighborhood. But I use this concept of necrosociality. So basically how death is used to not only form bonds between the living and the deceased, but also amongst the living themselves. So I think this grave really did this. And this is a quote from one of the men who planned to go into the grave after he had passed away. But when he was asked what he thought about the grave, he said he was definitely going into it after he passed away. And he talked about how it made him feel secure even while he was alive. So he said at the very least he won't be tossed aside when he dies. It gives him a sense of security. So when he's dead, he won't be lonely. And the men talked about being with each other in the afterlife in this grave, and how it would be very lively because they're all friends and things like that. And this quote here, I think, just really highlights that necro-social aspect of things. But the project also aimed to be political, and so they raised funds through crowdfunding, and they wanted to put out this message to broader Japanese society that a grave doesn't have to be just something that where your family kind of tends to the remains and comes and remembers you, but can be a place where fictive kin, so to speak, or friends in a broader community can bond together. And so as a lot of as Japanese society ages and it's harder for families to maintain these graves, they wanted to kind of change the perspective of graves and these kind of necro-social practices. So I talk about this in terms of resistant necropolitics. But just to move to another example from Osaka, is in this neighborhood of Kamagasaki. It is also one of these day labor ghettos with a lot of single room occupancy hotels there that's been around since even before the war, but really kind of solidified in the post-war era. This neighborhood is seeing a lot of tourist-related gentrification, and there was a local program by the local government to redevelop the neighborhood. And it was seen as being a big threat that the local government wanted to kind of wipe the neighborhood off the map and remove all the poor people and all the homelessness and people living on welfare and things like that. But the local network of community organizations, that cluster, that service hub there, really kind of bonded together. And after decades of being in total opposition to the government, they decided that this was an opportunity to work with the government and try to redevelop in the best way possible and preserve that service hub that cares for the local population. So some of that collaboration with the local government could be looked at, cynically as there's this term of roll with it gentrification. So that the local community organizations just kind of became part of the gentrification process. But the people that were actually involved in this don't look at it that way at all. And they do see it more in terms of contesting displacement, and that their participation with government in this project in itself is resistance, because they're preserving their own neighborhood, even though all this transformation is happening around it. So this is just a I know it's a really complex diagram here in Japanese, but it just shows all the different participants in these community meetings to talk about the redevelopment of the neighborhood. And there were upwards of 30 different organizations. They met many, many times, and the public was involved. Not only the participating organizations, but the audience was, there were workshops to bring in new ideas and things like that. And even though there are critiques of it, it was very participatory. And the point I want to make is that participation was really enabled by the decades of networking that these community organizations had done. And this picture here is from the summer festival in Kamagasaki. It's hard to see, but there's a sign up on the stage that says it's the 43rd summer festival. So this was in 2014. So by now they've had over 50 years of these summer festivals where all the local community organizations, which range from Christian organizations that have provided aid for decades to labor unions that have also been in effect for decades, groups that work on alcoholism and things like that. Just a wide variety of organizations. But this really reflects that long-standing network that was in place when the gentrification came to mitigate it. This slide here just highlights part of the gentrification side of things, and it really is just astonishing for those of you who study Japan or spend time in Japan. The emphasis on tourism across Japanese cities is just really breathtaking. So I find it kind of shocking that the local governments, who for a long time would try to ignore Kamagasaki, this neighborhood, now they have this beautiful website, really elaborate with all sorts of videos to attract tourists to the neighborhood and the areas around it. It kind of has a gritty feel to the neighborhood, a lot of character, some significant religious sites and things like that. And they do tours where you can go do tours of some of the shelters in the area. And on first glance, it's kind of for someone who's against gentrification, it's just kind of outrageous. But the people who have participated in this project see it as a way to educate the broader community about the history of the neighborhood. And they even do tours where I think they show some of the homeless shelters and things like that. But the website has even kind of co-opted what a lot of the day laborers who used to be attracted to this neighborhood
would say, and it's here on the bottom of the slide, that if you come here, things will somehow, you can somehow survive. But it's become a slogan to kind of attract tourists as well. So next, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic and how that relates to homelessness and these neighborhoods. But again, this goes to this back to this existing network of NPOs in the service hub, NPOs and other organizations in these service hub neighborhoods. But as soon as the pandemic began, these organizations looked at the pandemic as a syndemic. That's a word I'm using, not a word that they use, but they saw the intersection of the pandemic and a longer standing pandemic, if you will, of systemic inequality. So they saw those things as intersecting. They knew it was going to hit the poorest and the most marginalized the hardest. So they stepped into action really quickly. So in Osaka, this picture is from a mutual aid effort in Osaka, but a network of over 20 organizations quickly connected and collaborated in a mutual aid campaign, providing aid. They collected a lot of funds together to have cash readily available to pay for hotel rooms. They created online avenues to access aid. And they advocated to the local government for a wide variety of things. One of them was when the Japanese government announced that there would be one-time payments of about $1,000 to all citizens to help survive the pandemic. They quickly advocated to the government to get them to change their policy so they could receive that benefit. And it looks like the time is up, so I'll just jump to the conclusion. Japan has successfully invisibilized homelessness, but there is massive hidden homelessness there. But still, I think the U.S. can learn from that livelihood protection program. I think these NPOs in these service hubs really show the importance of this saying that I hear from a lot of activists in the US, that you have to stay ready so you don't have to get ready. So I'll just stop there, and I look forward to the discussion.